All right, so we're at about 150 folks now, and I'm gonna start with a little introduction, going over some of the logistics of today's call, and then I'll turn it over to Ingmar Gorman, who's here with me. But for those of you that I might not have had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Elizabeth Nielson. I'm the co-founder of Fluence. I'm a psychologist, and my role has been really for the past 10 years involvement in the field of psychedelic therapy research and training and education. And so these days I help run the company Fluence. I help design programs and create learning for people who are really interested in getting involved in the field. And I did serve as a therapist and site co-principal investigator on some of the LICO-sponsored MDMA therapy trials over a period of about 7 years, I think. So pretty long time. And I'm very happy to be really hosting this program for you because I think it's an important one. And I'm really just so glad to see that so many of you are interested in coming to join us to get some information and learn about what's going on with this, FDA approval process for MDMA assisted therapy, because there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to unpack. So as everybody is kind of joining us, I just will say one more reminder: we are on Zoom. Obviously, you don't have access to video for this. There's just so many folks joining this meeting that we're using webinar style, which means you won't have access to video to turn on your own video or to turn on your microphone. You do have access to the chat, so you're welcome to post your name and where you're from. It's really nice to introduce yourself that way. You may have questions during this program and things that you'd like to hear more about. If you have questions that you'd like to hear more about, please use the questions function in Zoom. If you put them in the chat with this many people here, they will probably get lost. So we won't really have a chance to answer them because we probably won't see them individually if they tend to get bumped up pretty quickly. So we really ask you to use the question format, and the Q&A function in Zoom should be at the bottom of your screen, a little pop-up if you just roll your mouse down there and find it. And that will help us to be able to address more of your questions. We might not get to all of your questions. We're going to be focusing on the questions that we think will really provide the most information for the most benefit of the most folks here. Just a reminder that we are here together. This is a group event, this is a community event, it's a professional event. We're a professional training organization. We know that many of you may have strong feelings about what's happening with the MDMA approval process, the research and such. And that's why this is such an important meeting. But also just remember, it's a professional environment, so we invite you to observe those and also maintain just a professional stance in relation to your colleagues who are here and us as well. And we really, really thank you for showing up in that way responsibly. What else can I say? I am really excited to bring this program to you. We are recording this program. If you're here now watching it, the program recording will be available to you through the learning management system. And if you have just signed up, for people who signed up and who aren't here presently and hearing this, you'll be able to access it through the learning management system later. An email will go out to everyone. So you'll get the link and you'll be able to review the material for some time. So without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Ingmar to give us an introduction and some updates and some information and a little bit of the backstory of what's happening with this FDA decision around MDMA-assisted therapy.
Right. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's wonderful to see, although I can't see your faces, I see your names, and it's really wonderful to see so many of you that are friends with, colleagues, people we've trained over the years. So it's really wonderful to see the turnout here. I imagine that many of you, well, I was prepared to jump in and talk just about the decision and implications and this kind of stuff. But Elizabeth reminded me that some of you attending here may actually not have so much of the background to MDMA-assisted therapy and MAPS and Lykos, and I'm not going to go over a full history, but I think Elizabeth's suggestion was correct that it would be helpful to just give some background context. So for those of you who know the story, then this might be familiar to you, but I just would like to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So without going too far back into history, the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder has been under investigation and under clinical trials, really for the better part now of 10 years. 2000, well, I was reminded that the first study was approved actually in 2001. It didn't start being conducted back then, but that is when MAPS, the organization then leading this research, got approval from the FDA to proceed with a clinical trial. So it is 2024, so that's what 23 years, if my math is correct, that this effort has been going forward. And MAPS, I might use MAPS and Lykos interchangeably, just to clarify the relationships there. MAPS is a nonprofit organization that was moving forward with this research and supporting it. MAPS was then became a public benefit corporation, and then it became Lykos, which is a for-profit company. And so I guess just for the sake of simplicity, I will be referring to Lykos moving forward. And I should mention that I am not speaking here on behalf of Lykos by any means. So anything I say here is not, again, I'm not a spokesperson for Lykos at all. So just to go back to that history, Lykos / MAPS has taken these clinical trials through the phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. Phase 3 is really the last step prior to that's a studies where there are about, in this case, between somewhere around 100 participants per study. There were 2 phase 3 studies, MAP 1 and MAP 2. And the studies examining, again, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, the data then is submitted to the FDA, and the FDA makes a decision on whether the data that is submitted is sufficient, or whether there will be essentially an approval of MDMA as a prescribable medicine. So this all has been going on really since the submission of the data and the review by the FDA towards the end of, or the beginning of this year. And as many of you here probably know, that the FDA arrived at a decision on Friday, and that has been widely covered in the news. And since we are a training organization in the psychedelic space, Fluence works with many different drug sponsors. We have a close connection to Lykos, although we're not a partnering organization per se, but we have delivered some of Lykos's educational experiences to some of you here. We thought that it was our responsibility to not remain silent, but to one, just share the information from the perspective of the importance of not just transparency, but also education. And we want all of you to be up to speed as far as we are informed as it relates to, again, the FDA decision and where Lykos stands. So I will say that, if you, not to, well, not bearing the lead, but I want to say that we don't have any information, how do I put this? Fluence does not have any more information than Lykos has. So if you're here hoping that you're going to learn something that is maybe top secret or something like that, that's not the point of this webinar. The point of this webinar is to share the information that is public and create an opportunity for you all to ask questions and for us to have a bit of a back and forth. So to get to the topic of the FDA's decision, on Friday, per our understanding, Lykos received a letter from the FDA that essentially stated that they cannot move forward with an approval at this time, but that there is an opportunity for an additional phase 3 study to be conducted by Lykos in order to gather more data. So what is really important to understand about that decision is that that is not a no, that is more data is necessary. From my personal perspective, and I think from the perspective of many of my colleagues that have worked on the clinical trials of Lykos, this is disappointing and sad. I mean, I want to just sort of name that certainly we were hoping that there would be some sort of approval, even maybe provisional or with significant oversight or a particularly slow rollout. That was our hope. I also want to just name that I myself, and also I know a number of my colleagues have been reached out by participants from the LICO studies who have expressed disappointment in this. It has also has negatively impacted some of them. Some of them have questioned their own healing, questioning, whether their therapeutic outcomes are just the consequence of uh, expectation or some sort of self-deception, which we firmly believe that that's not the case. But just to say that um, before we are thinking about Lycos or even Fluence an hour sort of priorities, I think it's really important to acknowledge the impact that this has had on the participants from these trials. And that's not to mention many of the individuals, patients out there who are really looking forward to this potential treatment to be approved. That being said, at Fluence, we really pride ourselves as being evidence-based and following the science and moving at the speed of science. And despite how much we uh, uh, feel that we are convinced by the data that we've seen, what is important in science is consensus. And this is part of the scientific process. So if somebody, particularly the FDA, says that there is more data that needs to be collected, then that's part of that process. And that is something that we support happening. Um, let's see here. Oh, well, I think the thing that's on everybody's mind is the question, why? Certainly that's on my mind. So the contents of the letter that Lykos received from the FDA outlines what are the necessary, not just the necessary steps to gather more data, that's the phase 3 trial, but what in particular was deemed to be insufficient about the data that was collected. And unfortunately, no one other than Lykos or the FDA have access to that letter. So for the reasons why this more data needs to be collected or another study needs to be conducted, it's just up to speculation. And so I would just caution that anybody who tells you that they know the reason why, and certainly I've made the mistake of visiting a lot of different social media profiles and websites because I want to know what people are thinking. I read a lot of very, very, very confident people who believe that they know what the answer to this question is. And I just really want to caution you, please wait to hear some sort of official message of, as it pertains to the reasons for the FDA's decision. When will that happen? That's a good question. I think that it's again, I'm not here. I'm not a spokesperson for Lykos. Lykos is taking necessary next steps, which is also includes a meeting with the FDA to as a follow-up. But I don't imagine this information of why being made public, certainly not before the Lykos meets with the FDA. And I really don't know how much longer after that this when this will become public information. So we're sort of left in the dark here as to wonder. I think just a little bit of my own thoughts on what has happened. I think it's really important to do some context setting. I did mention that um, MAPS back then got approval in 2001, and that was way before where we are today in terms of the psychedelic, if I can call it industry, or even even academic studies with psychedelics were very few and far between. Um, the DMT, Rick Strassman's DMT study in the 90s, but it wasn't really until the mid 2000s and then the 10 years after that, the teens, where there were more and more psychedelic studies happening. So just to name the time, and then that and the standards. So one thing that I was actually reflecting on, because we're talking about PTSD and trauma, uh, just how the field of mental health has reoriented itself around trauma in the last 20 years. I was not a clinician at that time. In 2001, I wasn't, I was actually in high school in 2000. But from my conversation with professors when I was in graduate school in 2010, still at that time, I think 2010 was a time when trauma began to be seen more as it just was at its beginning in terms of recognition of the impact of trauma on psychopathology. There was a period of several decades where the impact of trauma on mental health was seen sort of as this Freudian idea, and uh, essentially was discredited and not even taken into account. And I think the field is off much better now that trauma is taken seriously and is understood in terms of its role in psychopathology, or sorry, psychopathology, but also physiology and things like that. So that's one context setting. The other piece of this is just the standards around the FDA and how the FDA's requirements for research, and then in particular psychedelic research, has evolved over the last 20 years. For example, the guidelines for psychedelic research suggested by the FDA, I believe that those guidelines came out in 2022. So long story short, Lycos / MAPS were first movers, right? They were um, a organization and then company that were moving first through this door. And I think it's disappointing but understandable that the FDA wants to set a very, very strong standard for psychedelic therapies. And maybe to say that although these outcomes are disappointing, I know that the VA is very, very focused on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. They have been conducting studies and will continue to conduct studies on MDMA. So it's not like this research is stopping, but we are still waiting to see what Lykos's next step will be in terms of another clinical trial. And it is definitely a significant bump in the road. That being said, there are other psychedelic compounds, other drug sponsors that are moving forward with their phase 3 trials. That includes, again, we have no affiliation, but just to name, Compass Pathways is one example of this, a company that's taking psilocybin through phase 3. Cybin, which is an organization that is one of Fluence's clients. And then really dozens and dozens of other drug sponsors that are in various stages of phase 2, some in phase 1. Some drug sponsors have multiple compounds that they're looking at for multiple indications. So again, although this is disappointing for the mostly for the industry and the patients in the real world, there's a large wave of other companies that will follow in Lykos's footsteps. Maybe I'll end on this one note. In addition to Fluence, the value of evidence-based treatment or the science, us moving at the pace of science. Another kind of cornerstone of who we are is also harm reduction and integration. That's one of our core principles. And that means that, we also recognize that not everybody benefits from a psychedelic experience. Some people have experienced difficulties as the result of psychedelic experiences. That includes also MDMA. We know from private practice work, I'm sure that many of you have had clients who've tried MDMA for whom it may have been helpful for certain things, but may have also activated or have created challenging integration processes. So I say that to say that, again, if the FDA requires more data, we aren't blind to the fact that these are really complicated treatments, and we want to make sure that really the safety of the public, if MDMA were to become a medicine, that's a priority, and we're not blind to it. So I will take a pause and maybe pass it on to Elizabeth. Unless Elizabeth, do you have any questions for me? Anything that you felt that I might have left out, or anything you think that our audience would benefit from hearing? You're on mute, by the way.
I was reading the questions. It might actually be helpful to talk a little bit about what is the difference between a psychedelic assisted therapy model and a psychological support model. Because I think that is a distinction here that is in terms of the actual approach taken in the Lykos trials, that is also true of where it came from in terms of the history and when those trials were designed. And I can speak more to like how, what kind of variety out there looks like now, but maybe just to explain a little bit more for folks what it means when something is a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy trial versus a psychedelic treatment trial that's got a psychological support style model.
Oh, so yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot to say here, but I will answer your question, which is right. So we work with various drug sponsors. Fluence does about I believe 8 different ones, and there is a spectrum of emphasis on the psychotherapy. Psychedelic assisted psychotherapy versus say a psychedelic treatment where there's more say some drug sponsors like to use the term support, some like to use the term monitoring. So in a nutshell, what this could be summarized that some drug sponsors are looking to take a treatment, hopefully to market and get approval that is a psychotherapy plus psychedelic combination, whereas other drug sponsors are taking the approach of really putting emphasis on the effect of the psychedelic, and then providing still support of people in the room with the participant, but the support is, or rather the person is providing support. And then how that's defined depends on the particular drug sponsor. But we could say that it is a less intensive psychotherapy, or it's a approach that doesn't, it might have some elements of psychotherapy in it, but is not a full-fledged intensive psychotherapy. That could be then broken down into why and the strategies and things and implications for the future, but it is something that is happening.
A succinct answer to a pretty complex scenario, but I might just want to tip people off to the idea that there are a variety of approaches being taken in the current, variety of research studies that we're seeing. And, what that means is that not all of these studies have the same type of design. So some things that may have not worked in one study may have been addressed or done differently in a different study. And I think that the trial design is there's actually a lot of sort of evolution in terms of the thinking and the best practices. It's not to say that psychedelic assisted psychotherapy models are, off the table and they're no longer being tried. But there are many potential pathways, right? And so nobody has really reached that approval, idea yet, or gotten that yet. So we don't yet know, like what it will look like if one of those is approved. But just to say, there's variety out there, right? Not everybody's doing everything the same.
Elizabeth, I realize we should have probably had an hour and a half long webinar because we're almost halfway through. I think for the sake of efficiency, it might be helpful for me to just go through some of the Q&A questions that are here now that pertain to the things that I've mentioned,
Mhm.
and then just sort of quickly address some of them that can be quickly addressed. And then
Go for it.
maybe we'll transition to you. Um, so, and I might be I will be addressing some of your questions by just making certain statements. I'm not going to necessarily read them out loud. So one thing that's notable is that the Netherlands have created a legal pathway for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. So this addresses this idea that and we have also similarly with Australia. So although the United States is now there's a setback here, other countries are moving forward with accessible legal MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. Somebody mentioned and asked this question of whether the FDA supported MAPS/Lykos in the design of their clinical trial, and that is correct. And this, I think I will probably refrain from talking about the AdCom meeting because that would just open up a whole sort of Pandora's box of comments. But the reason why I bring that up is just with this topic of functional unblinding. There's also a question that's raised here in the Q&A. For those of you who aren't familiar with this idea, it's simply the fact that participants in the study could successfully guess that they received MDMA, and question of whether that impairs the interpretability of the data that were gathered. And so that connects to this question about the FDA supporting the design with MAPS. Yes, this is the case. In 2017, the FDA and MAPS worked together to address this question, anticipating that there would be functional unblinding. And this is a big contribution to why independent raters were selected to rate the PTSD symptoms at multiple time points using the CAPS. And so, if I were to go out on a limb here, I would be really surprised if the FDA letter to Lykos had to do simply with the functional unblinding. I think there had to have been something more integral with the data for the FDA to land on the decision that more research is needed. That's my speculation. Please, that's not conclusive. Don't quote me as saying that it is. It's just my speculation. I think I'll save this for a second. So here's another one, states. So somebody asks whether we think more states will come online by either offering other psychedelic therapies or potentially MDMA. I think it's a possibility. I think that clearly the demand for this treatment and the disappointment that has been expressed by various patient organizations, I could imagine that states will want to move forward prior to the federal government making a decision. And Fluence will be following that closely. But again, we do want to move at the speed of science and also what's legal. We don't want to train anybody in anything that is not legally available or something that could be ethically practiced. So, but it is going to be very interesting to follow what is happening on a state level over the course of the next few months, maybe a year. Let's see here. Oh boy. More questions.
Can I add something to that
Yeah,
about
sure.
training in states? So many of you know that we have had for the last 2 years approximately a training program that is approved and licensed to train people who want to get licensed as facilitators in Oregon, because there is a state legal pathway there. So we always follow, what practitioners can do within their scope of practice where there's a legal avenue for you to practice, right? And so someone asked about whether or not we'd be training people to provide MDMA therapy. Right now, there's no avenue to do that outside of research. If someone is conducting a research study and they want us to provide training for the clinicians on that research study, where there is an avenue to use that education, then that's something that we do and we can do and we have done for and are doing for a host of different variety of different drug developers at this time. But those programs are not available unless you're actually working on the research study. With regards to other states, we're in the process of actually applying for approval to have our psilocybin program provide licensure qualifying education in Colorado. And so this hasn't even been announced yet. I'm just telling you here. It's the really first time it's mentioning it publicly. If you go to our website now, you'll see some updated information on our psilocybin page. And that is a program that we're in the process of getting approval for. So I can't say it is approved, but we expect that it will be. We're applying. We have had the program in Oregon now for 2 years. And we're going to be, hopefully upon approval, providing training that will allow you to get licensed to practice psilocybin in Colorado as well. Other states may come online and offer something similar. That doesn't mean that it is legal at the federal level. It's sort of a different system. But when we say we want to make sure that we're training you in things that you have a legal avenue to practice, we do include programs where there's a state licensure to provide that practice. We acknowledge that and we include that. And so someone asked in the questions if states could legalize MDMA the same way they did for psilocybin. Theoretically, I suppose they could. I don't know that it would receive, I don't know how it would be received by the communities and the federal government, because MDMA is clearly different from psilocybin. It's a very different safety profile and sort of just different parameters around it. But just so that folks know, we are working with those kinds of state-approved programs. And that's a really important thing to know about, a way to get involved if you want to get this kind of training with us in a way that leads to an approved legal avenue to use it.
Thank you. I see a number of questions that pertain to additional training and education related to MDMA. I mean, I think let's separate those two out, right? So education as it pertains to MDMA, I think anybody, particularly licensed mental health professionals, should continue to educate themselves on the subject, because they're working with clients, or you will be working with clients who are using MDMA outside of you administering it to them. And that's really important to be able to provide proper care, including preparation, integration. As it pertains to training to administer MDMA and, let's say, become an MDMA-assisted therapist, to create that idea, I would be cautious to pursue companies that are saying that they can train you to be an MDMA-assisted therapist without there being a very clear pathway for you to do that legally, unless you want just that knowledge for yourself. In other words, up to this point, Lykos was anticipated to be the main route and pathway to become a legal practitioner of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy and being able to administer it. But at this time point, we have to wait until what Lykos decides to do next. And I think it's an open question. And the role of psychotherapy in this work, I hope it still stays an integral piece of it. And I see that I think it probably will. But just be cautious around any training program that promises that you a legal pathway, unless, again, it's in a country where it is legal, or perhaps in a state where it might become legal. I want to just make one clarifying statement about what Elizabeth said in terms of our application to Colorado. That is for psilocybin. There isn't a pathway there for MDMA. Just because we're talking about MDMA, I don't want anybody to think that there's a Colorado MDMA program. That's, as far as I know, not the case.
That's correct.
Before I pass it on to you, Elizabeth, I have another thought, because surprisingly, this has not come up in the Q&A. I anticipated that it would be, but I want to really address the publication retractions. Elizabeth, are you okay with me doing that?
Yeah, it actually is in the Q&A. There's just
It
a lot
is?
of questions in the
Yeah,
Q&A.
yeah. I'm
I'm
trying to
sort
give.
of trying to sort through them at this time. So
Okay, so I don't know what the question is, but I will give you information on this topic.
just asking about the topic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have been, this is something that I have actually been closely involved with over the course of the last year because I am a lead author on a paper that came from from the same data set. Let me backtrack. Not everybody here may be familiar with what I'm talking about. So on Saturday, the Psychopharmacology, which is a journal that published multiple studies or papers on the phase 2 studies of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, put out a notice that the 3 papers that were submitted to their journals would be retracted. For those of you who aren't familiar with what this means, retraction is essentially, you could think of it as a black mark on the research or on the article, and it is as if the data or that study is removed from the scientific record. It's such a harsh judgment that it's sort of saying, well, this research is not um, valid anymore. So you might be wondering why. There, again, lots of speculation on the internet, lots of misinformation. Please do not pay attention to that. I would just urge you to go to the articles, the particular websites, read what the retraction notice says. There are 2 statements. One reason given by the journal was that I'll start with the simpler one first. There were several cases where conflict of interest were not declared, which I and some of them were declared. It was an oversight by the authors. This unto itself, in usual practice, does not merit a retraction. Just to say, what a journal can do as an alternative to a retraction, which is much more common, is just a correction. So the journal will say on such and such date, this was changed in the published paper because new information came to light or something was overlooked. It happens relatively often. The other reason for the retraction, and I think this is really the main reason for the retraction, is that, as many of you probably know, in one of the phase 2 studies, there was an incident of a participant being mistreated and then sexually abused by a study therapist. Needless to say, as soon as this came to light, that study therapist was removed from the therapist pool. They were not part of the phase 3 research. I can't go into all of the lengths that Lykos and MAPS did to address this. And there are fair or reasonable criticisms that can be made as it pertains to Lykos's response. But as it pertains to these retractions and these journal articles, when these papers were submitted to the journal for review, the authors did not disclose that the participant that was harmed was part of the data set for the analysis. People are going to ascribe malicious intent. I will say that I was the first author on a paper that used this data set, and I overlooked it. It didn't cross my mind. I'll speak for myself. This was a mistake on my part. I certainly do not think that this participant data or the data of the participants at this site where this abuse happened should be included in the data set, nor should their data be part of the scientific record. So I think it's completely the right move to remove that data or those data. But this journal in particular decided to say that the entire paper or these 3 papers are null and void, or specifically they're retracted because the authors failed to mention that this abuse happened. So I want to really be clear. It's not because the abuse happened. It's not for other reasons that people have been speculating. But it is because, as the retraction notice states, the authors failed to disclose that this happened. As it pertains to my paper in particular, it was not retracted. My paper was corrected, and we expect there to be other phase 2 papers that will also be corrected and not retracted. What was done was that the 4 participants that were at this site at phase 2 were removed from the data set. The analysis was rerun, and although the statistics changed, the significance did not. And so in none of the reanalyses that I'm aware of were the conclusions no longer valid. Personally, my opinion is that I think it is a little bit heavy-handed to retract a paper even when the correction is made and the participants are removed from the analysis. When we think about the scientific record, I still think that that data is valid. But that's just my opinion. You might be asking the question, why was psychopharmacology, why did they retract it while other journals did not? There was there's an investigative reporter who had been communicating with the editor of psychopharmacology for some time, who's been publishing their communications on Twitter, their email communications on Twitter with the editor of the journal. And my sense is that this investigative reporter was probably motivated for a very harsh penalty. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say about this. Yeah, I don't think so. I think that might be it. Maybe one last thing to say is that the FDA makes its decision based off of phase 3 data, not phase 2 data. So any speculation that these retractions have anything to do with the FDA's decision, it does not. So I said a lot there. I hope that was clear.
No, thanks for explaining that, because it's a lot to wrap your head around, especially if you have not ever had to go through the academic publishing process. If you have spared yourself that experience in life, it's just a lot to understand. Like, what does this mean? What's a retraction? What's a correction? What's a rejection? A lot of terminology. So it's helpful to have some transparency around that process. Yeah, so really just appreciate your explanations there in a clear sense. We had several questions about this in the chat, and I've seen a few in the chat and a few in the questions. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about training options and training education in this field now. Most of you here are clinicians, or you have maybe already done some training in this field. So I think what's important to keep in mind is that training and education in this field has been relevant for a long time. It continues to be relevant. I don't think this makes it any less relevant, right? It doesn't mean that the clients that are coming into your office have fewer questions about psychedelics and about psychedelic therapy. In fact, they may have even more, because now they're seeing it on the news. Now they're seeing it, they're seeing all this debate online about it. And so they may even be more interested, or just have more questions or doubts or concerns or curiosities. So it's more, I think, more and more relevant every day for clinicians to be educated and trained in a really solid harm reduction informed model for approaching those conversations in clinical practice. And so we have a variety of programs that help equip you with the skills and training and education necessary to be able to approach and hold those conversations. That way of working, that psychedelic harm reduction and integration model, is really the core of our program. It was like the original thing that we started developing and teaching about, I don't know, back in 2018, 2019, we were holding our first workshops around this. So there's never been a better time to become confident and competent in how you approach those conversations when your clients are coming in saying, hey, I saw this in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. What's going on here? What do you think? Should I be thinking about this? Should I not be thinking about this? I have this indication. I struggle. I suffer. Is this safe? Et cetera. So I really always encourage you to look into those kinds of programs. If you feel that the one of the most important things that you really want to be able to do with your clients is actually to be a provider of a psychedelic therapy model where you are with someone during that experience, the avenues that are open for the majority of you right now, majority of clinicians, are to learn the skills and competencies around working with ketamine, and perhaps pretty soon to think about going for training in one of the state approved licensure programs. And the reason I say that is because even though Oregon has been open for 2 years, it's only in 2025 that they will actually start accepting, allowing people who don't live in state to become licensed. So up until 3-4 months from now, 5 months from now, whenever the end of the year is, you could get the training, but you still couldn't actually get licensed. And that's going to open up in 2025. Colorado will allow people from out of state to get licensed to the best of my knowledge and understanding at this point. So you may find yourself in a situation where you want to have an avenue to be able to be a provider of that kind of experience. And now that's opening up. And we do have those programs, and we do welcome you to come and check them out and explore them. So the way our program is structured, we've got a core certificate program called Essentials of Psychedelic Therapy and Integration, and that is a 6-week online live course. It's got a lot of asynchronous materials that go with it. It's got awesome teachers. It's got home groups. You get to know people. You practice things. It's really cool. And then you can go on to one of the advanced modules in one of these specialty areas. And I think, someone asked this question in a maybe slightly different format in the Q&A, but I did see it like, is there relevancy and crossover between the different training in the different types of modules, like training in MDMA therapy versus training in ketamine therapy versus training in psilocybin therapy? And by and large, the answer is yes. The approaches, a lot of the standards in terms of how we kind of conceptualize trauma-informed care across all different indications, all different, working with all different molecules, working with all different kinds of populations. There's a lot of similarity. That's why the program is structured to give you this core certificate and then let you specialize in different applications of that. But the standard, the basic underlying principles, yes, they are unifying, and they are similar across the different approaches. So what I want to leave you with is like a note of encouragement. There are things you can do. There are ways you can get involved there. If you are a licensed clinician, there are most likely ways that you can practice within your scope of practice that allow you to have conversations about these kinds of experiences with your clients, and that give you an avenue to use use the science, use the research that's being done to draw on that and to bring it into your practice and to use it to be able to inform what you're doing today. One other kind of opportunity that I'll talk about, although it doesn't come up quite as often, is to get involved with working on a research trial. So as we've said, we have multiple clients that are research sponsors, and they have multi-site, multinational trials where they're running psychedelic treatment trials at sites really all around the world. And so we're not directly responsible for staffing those sites, although sometimes we do get notices that sites are looking for clinicians. But what I really suggest is if you want to get involved, do some research, search on clinicaltrials.gov, find studies that have sites that are in your area. If a research site, which might be a clinic, it might be a university, it might be a private research site. But if a research site has one study, they're most likely going to have more, because they tend to not just do one, they tend to do one and then, add on several more, maybe for different sponsors. So if you see a site in your community that is running a site for a clinical trial of a psychedelic, and you can get in touch with someone and ask about onboarding or ask about being on their waiting list for future opportunities like that, and build that relationship and keep in touch with them, that's the way to get in, because the sites are responsible for that kind of staffing. Sometimes they come to us and ask for for us to refer people, but usually they go look in their own networks and within their own communities. So you can build those relationships within your community in terms of who's in your state. They're going to want people that are licensed locally anyway. And then a lot of those trials we're actually doing the training for, and we've had people come through those training programs and then wind up coming and teaching with us, and it really does generate a nice back and forth between those two things. So, Ingmar,
If I could just
you want to
interject
add?
very, very quickly, is be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
Doing it's incredibly rewarding to be able to do psychedelic therapy in a clinical trial, but also it's not to go into this for too long, but just to say that working in a clinical trial is very, very, very different than working in a hospital or working in private practice, particularly a phase 2 or phase 3 trial, where there's a significant oversight, a ton of paperwork. There's also the limitations of working within the clinical trial framework. I think one of the hardest things for us as clinical trial therapists, particularly on the trials of MDMA, is having to end study simply because the dose of the therapy is controlled. There are a set number of sessions, and sometimes participants felt that they wanted more. Often they wanted more support and more contact, more therapy sessions. So there are also downsides to being on a clinical trial. So if that's something that you feel like you want to be involved in research and you want to take on those responsibilities, we really support you in doing so. And I encourage you to follow the steps that Elizabeth shared. But please, 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 please be aware that it's very difficult and grueling, and it's not like being in private practice.
And just to address another couple of questions from the chat, clinicaltrials.gov is worldwide. So it lists clinical trial sites all over the world. If you go on a clinical trial of a psychedelic that is multinational, you will see all the sites there in the whole world. It's not just US. And then someone also asked about attaining licensure in 2025 in Oregon. Like I said, we're expanding our program to Colorado as well. But yes, my understanding right now is that the future iteration of the program will also lead you to be able to be licensed in Oregon in 2025, even if you are out of state. We are active. The reason I'm hesitating is a little because we're actively working through the details with the state of Colorado right now. It's not fully finalized. I don't want to give you wrong information, but please pay attention to our mailing list and pay attention to our posts, because as soon as we have those details and we can share for sure exactly what you need to do to get licensed in which state, we will be sending that out and sharing that. And we encourage you to get involved if that's that's a route that's feels viable for you.
I'm going to use a minute to beat my drum on one thing. There's a comment here. I think it was reflecting on the AdCom as well as the FDA, which is that the comment is that there may be a lack of understanding about psychotherapy within the FDA. Certainly, it's not within their scope or oversight. I don't want to speculate about the FDA's decision and assume that their decision around Lykos and MDMA has to do with a lack of understanding of psychotherapy research. The drum that I want to beat is just that, well, it was visible in the AdCom, and as many of you here are psychotherapists and have some familiarity with psychotherapy research, and I just want to make a call out to say that it's just really important that you all are talking to your colleagues and speaking about that work in that field. Because I think that if at least the FDA AdCom had more understanding of how psychotherapy research works and the lengths that Lykos went to systematize, operationalize, and quantify the psychotherapy component of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, I think that aspects of the AdCom meeting would have gone very, very differently. It's not just that psychedelics are a new edge or a new field to understand. just the field of psychotherapy research generally has been overlooked over the last several decades. And I think that that's reflected when we're talking about psychedelic assisted psychotherapies.
Yeah, so again, I just to reiterate, I know we said this earlier, but some people may have not been here yet. We don't have, we don't have secret knowledge of what Lycos's plans are or what's going to happen in terms of what the exact next steps are, what this phase 3 study situation might look like, how it might be staffed, who might run it. We don't know whether it will offer opportunities for clinicians who've done the education pieces to get their practice pieces and all of that. So I acknowledge there's a lot that remains to be seen and a lot that you all want to know. I just really want to thank you all for your patience with this process and for your questions that are just intuitive and insightful and demonstrate a sense of curiosity about what's happening. It is so hard not to jump to conclusions when something this big is happening. But we really do have to practice. This is like practice that openness and curiosity and that approach towards what's happening right now, because in those unknowns there still remains just so much incredible possibility and so much wonderful stuff that we can learn from this process. And there are so many amazing places to apply what we're learning and what we have learned already in this process. So I thank you all for being part of this. Please stick around. Someone asked if the recording will be available. Yes, the recording will be available. We'll make it available in the classroom. It's not going to be available for new signups, but it will be available to all of you and everyone who pre-registered for this program. We've had an amazing audience today. I've seen some really familiar names, some old friends, some folks who are absolute industry leaders in the field. If you know who's who and you're looking at the attendee list, it's really heartening to see just the level of support and participation that we've got amongst you. So keep reaching out, keep in touch. Just want to remind you, our newsletter is coming. There will be more updates on our programs as soon as we have them, especially around Colorado, especially around new research studies, and all the developments in the field. So thank you, everybody. Oh, thank you so much. So
Thank you
nice to
so
see your
much.
comments. Yeah, take care, everybody. Stay tuned. And yeah, we hope to see you in program soon.